and other British cities. British armed forces, which lacked adequate arms and ammunition, were on the defensive everywhere. German submarines were operating at will in the Atlantic, sinking vast amounts of merchant shipping and slowly strangling British supply lines. Starvation for the civilian population loomed as a distinct possibility, as did a cross-channel invasion by Germany. "We were hanging on by our eyelids," recalled Field Marshal Lord Alanbrooke, Britain's top military leader during the war. Winant himself would later write, "There were many times when one felt the sands would run out and that all would be over." As the British well knew, their only hope for salvation lay in American help. Yet that aid had been miserly thus far, even as Britain's future grew increasingly bleak. Many in Washington had already written the country off. How could this little island, no matter how glorious its military past, resist an invader that had toppled every country in its path like so many duck pins? Among those who believed in Britain's inevitable defeat was Joseph P. Kennedy, Winant's predecessor as U.S. ambassador, who, along with several thousand other American residents of Britain, fled to the United States at the height of the Blitz. Winant, by contrast, made it clear from the beginning that he was in the country to stay. "There was one man who was with us, who never believed we would surrender, and that was John Gilbert Winant," noted Ernest Bevin, a leading figure in Churchill's government. Within days of the new ambassador's arrival, an embassy subordinate remarked he had conveyed to the entire British nation the sure feeling that here was a friend. Winant, however, was not the only American in London to take a critical role in encouraging the British and pressing for an Anglo-American partnership. Two others, W. Averell Harriman and Edward R. Murrow, were prominent actors in the drama as well. Harriman, the aggressive, ambitious chairman of the Union Pacific Railroad, arrived in the British capital soon after Winant to become administrator of U.S. Lend-Lease aid to Britain. Murrow, the head of CBS News in Europe, had been stationed in the British capital since 1937. As the most important Americans in London during the war's early years, Winant, Harriman, and Murrow were key participants in America's debate over whether Britain, the last European country holding out against Hitler, should be saved. While Murrow championed the British cause in his broadcasts to the American people, Harriman and Winant mediated between a desperate prime minister and a cautious president, who was as wary of his isolationist opponents at home as he was initially skeptical of Britain's chances. The famous friendship that developed between these dominating egocentric leaders, two prima donnas, Harry Hopkins, Roosevelt's chief aide, called them, was nowhere on the horizon at that point. In the years since the war, most of the attention and much of the credit for the triumph of the Anglo-American alliance has been given to the intimate collaboration of Roosevelt and Churchill. Much less carefully examined has been the vital part played by men like Winant, Harriman, and Murrow in laying the groundwork for the two leaders' partnership, at a time when Roosevelt and Churchill not only were strangers, but were suspicious and even hostile toward each other. Sent to London as Roosevelt's eyes and ears, Winant and Harriman were to evaluate Britain's capacity for resistance and survival. Both swiftly came to the conclusion that Britain would hold out, and they made clear to Washington they stood with her. The two envoys lobbied Roosevelt and his men to provide as much aid as possible, and even to go to war. In more veiled language, Murrow did the same in his broadcasts. Knowing how important the three men were to his country's survival, Churchill courted them as relentlessly as he would later woo Roosevelt. The Prime Minister had an open-door policy where Murrow was concerned. Winant and Harriman became part of Churchill's inner circle, with unprecedented access to the Prime Minister and members of his government. Rarely, before or since, has diplomacy been so personal. That intimacy also extended to the Americans' relationship with members of the Prime Minister's family. Indeed, so intense were their bonds with the Churchills that Harriman, Winant, and Murrow all engaged in wartime love affairs with Churchill family members. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and the United States finally entered the